Why do some places thrive while others, with many of the same advantages, struggle to realize their potential? It's a question that governments have been asked for decades. Economists ask it, business leaders ask it, universities ask it, communities ask it. The usual answers are familiar: more investment, better infrastructure, more research, more skills. And of course, all of the above matter, but they aren't the whole story. The real difference is how well they connect what they already have. Manchester offers us a fascinating case study, not because it discovered a secret formula, and not because everything about Manchester is perfect, but because over the past 3 decades, it's built one of Britain's most connected innovation ecosystems. This isn't really a presentation about Manchester, it's a presentation about what Manchester can teach us. Because if we understand how Manchester has achieved what it has, those lessons could spread not just to other cities, but to any organisation, any region, or any society seeking to thrive in increasingly uncertain times. If Manchester can do this, why can't every region? It's a deceptively simple question, and behind it lies another. Why do some places repeatedly transform knowledge into opportunity, while others, with talented people, excellent universities, and ambitious organisations, never quite achieve the same momentum? Over the next 15 minutes, I'd like to suggest that the answers aren't primarily about intelligence, or funding, or geography. It's about something far more fundamental. It's about relationships, it's about trust, it's about learning, and ultimately, it's about how whole systems can become capable of thinking together. The evidence is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Manchester has become one of the UK's leading centres for innovation and investment. It attracts international businesses. It creates high-value employment. It commercialises research. It continues to attract confidence from investors. But notice this: these statistics, important though they are not really today's subject. They're the outcome. Our real interest is the mechanism that produces them. Because outcomes can be admired, mechanisms can be learned, and if the mechanisms can be understood, it can be adapted for use elsewhere. That's a much more interesting conversation. One of the easiest explanations would be to say Manchester simply has better universities, but that doesn't really withstand scrutiny. Britain already possesses some of the finest universities anywhere in the world: outstanding research, outstanding academics, outstanding students. Many regions have excellent universities, yet relatively few generate the same levels of collaboration momentum. So perhaps the difference isn't quality, perhaps it's configuration. Look carefully at what this diagram is really showing. The universities haven't changed, the surrounding organisations haven't changed. What changes are the connections. Knowledge only creates value when it moves. Ideas only become innovation when they connect with people who can apply them. In other words, it's not simply what exists, it's how everything is configured. That single insight changes almost everything that follows. This brings us to one of the clearest physical expressions of that idea. The Oxford Road corridor on the surface is a place, but it's more than that. It's a living network: universities, teaching hospitals, research laboratories, businesses, investors, and the city itself. Not simply co-located, but connected. People meet repeatedly, ideas travel naturally, problems are tackled together. Knowledge doesn't stop at institutional boundaries, it crosses them. That's the difference. Innovation isn't produced by buildings, it's produced by people in relationships. Places matter, but relationships matter more. And the Oxford Road Corridor reminds us that ecosystems don't emerge by accident, they're cultivated intentionally over time. This may be the most important slide in the presentation, because success stories often create a dangerous illusion. We see the results and assume they appeared quickly, but ecosystems don't grow like that. Trust doesn't appear because organizations decide they ought to collaborate. Trust accumulates, relationship by relationship, project by project, year by year. Look at the timeline, 3 decades. 3 decades of people learning how to work together. 3 decades of shared purpose. 3 decades of building confidence that collaboration is worth the effort. That's what we're really looking at. Not simply a successful city, but a region that has developed the capability to learn collectively over time. And once that capability exists, it becomes extraordinarily difficult for others to replicate quickly, because trust cannot be copied, it has to be grown. And that brings us to perhaps the most important lesson of all. Even successful models still have unfinished work to do. There's an important reason not to romanticize Manchester. Success doesn't automatically spread. Like many successful cities, Manchester has areas that have flourished and others that have benefited far less. The city centre has attracted investment, high value jobs, new businesses, new opportunities, yet some surrounding communities continue to experience lower productivity, lower investment, and fewer opportunities. This isn't a criticism of Manchester, it's a reminder of something universal. Growth naturally concentrates, learning naturally concentrates, investment naturally concentrates, unless we deliberately create ways for them to spread and scale. That's why the unfinished task isn't creating prosperity, it's extending prosperity, helping every community become part of the same learning. Because a successful region is measured by how much opportunity reaches its most overlooked places. One of the habits we've developed in public policy is expecting transformation to happen quickly. 3-year funding programs, 5-year strategies, political cycles, short-term targets. Manchester reminds us that real transformation follows a very different rhythm, not months, not electoral cycles, but decades. The institutions we admire today are the product of thousands of conversations, shared risks, successful collaborations, and lessons learned together. That's why I find this slide so encouraging, because it tells us that this wasn't magic. It was patient work, a vision, repeated consistently, relationships strengthened over time, learning that accumulated rather than being lost. That's perhaps the greatest strategic lesson of all. The most important capabilities aren't built through projects, they're built through habits. Now let's zoom out from Manchester to Britain. What do we see? We see extraordinary knowledge, outstanding universities, leading researchers, innovative businesses, world-class science. But we also see something else. Too much of that knowledge remains concentrated. Ideas emerge but don't spread. Investment arrives but doesn't diffuse. Innovation happens but doesn't travel. The problem isn't a shortage of ideas, It's a shortage of connections. And once you see that, you start seeing it everywhere, between departments, between organizations, between sectors, between places. We have knowledge. What we lack are the mechanisms that help knowledge move. And that changes the question entirely. Instead of asking, how do we create more knowledge? Perhaps we should be asking, how do we help what we can already know spread further? None of today's major challenges belongs neatly to one sector. Health doesn't, skills don't, productivity doesn't, the climate problem doesn't, nor does regional growth. Every significant challenge crosses organisational boundaries. So perhaps our institutions shouldn't work as though those boundaries define reality. The greatest value is created when the public sector, the private sector, and civil society combine their different strengths around shared purpose. That's what I mean by civic enterprise, not replacing existing institutions, connecting them, not asking organizations to become the same, helping them become stronger together. Because collaboration isn't simply a nice idea, increasingly it's becoming a strategic necessity. The Manchester story demonstrates something profound. Success wasn't produced by one outstanding institution, or one outstanding leader, or one outstanding investment. It emerged because multiple organizations gradually learned how to behave as one ecosystem. Each borough retains its own identity, each organization retains its own purpose, yet together they create something none of them could create on their own. That's what ecosystems do. They don't remove diversity, they connect diversity, shared purpose, shared learning, shared impact. Those three ideas sit at the center of this slide, and I would suggest they sit at the center of every resilient region, because ecosystems don't compete through individual excellence alone. They compete through collective capability. Everything we've looked at so far raises one final question. If this is how successful ecosystems develop, how do we help other places do the same? Not by copying Manchester, because every region is different. Every place has different history, different institutions, different strengths. Instead, we need a way of helping each region discover its own future together. That's what these three phrases represent. First, creating space to think differently. Then, working honestly with today's realities. And finally, turning shared insight into practical experiments that can be tested, improved, and expanded. Notice something. This isn't a project plan, it's a learning journey, one that invites universities, businesses, government, communities, and citizens to become co-designers of the future they want to create. Because lasting change is rarely delivered to people, it's created with them. And that's why Manchester matters. Not because it gives us a model to copy, but it gives us confidence that this kind of long-term collective learning really can succeed. If there's one idea I'd like you to take away from Manchester, it's this. Manchester isn't exceptional because it found a secret. It's exceptional because it demonstrated what becomes possible when organisations learn to connect their strengths over time. That's an important distinction. Too often, we see success elsewhere and we ask, how do we copy it? But copying is rarely the answer. The institutions are different, the history is different, the culture is different. So what can be transferred isn't the model, it's the capability. the capability to build trust, to connect people, to learn continuously, and to adapt together. Manchester is proof that this is possible. Now the question becomes, how do we help many more places develop the same capability themselves? This, I believe, is the real opportunity. For many years we've assumed that competitiveness depends primarily on resources, capital, technology, infrastructure, talent. Those things will always matter, but increasingly the places that succeed won't simply be those with the greatest resources. They'll be the places that learn most efficiently, most effectively, the places where universities, businesses, public services, communities, and citizens don't simply work alongside one another, but think together, experiment together, adapt together. In other words, they develop collective intelligence, not the intelligence of any one organization, but the intelligence of the whole system. Perhaps that becomes the next great competitive advantage, not simply knowing more or learning faster, but learning together. Let's imagine what that would look like. Imagine every region developing its own participatory learning network, not another committee, not another partnership, but a living network, universities learning alongside business, local government learning alongside communities, health services learning alongside voluntary organizations, and investors learning alongside entrepreneurs, each bringing different knowledge, different experience, different perspectives, not trying to eliminate those differences, but using them, because diversity isn't an obstacle to better decisions. When people genuinely learn together, it becomes one of the greatest strengths. Imagine every region becoming progressively better at understanding itself, better at solving problems, better at creating opportunity, better at adapting to whatever comes next. That's the opportunity before us. I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Throughout this presentation, we've talked about investment, innovation, universities, enterprise, communities. But beneath all of those lies something much simpler: learning. Not learning as education, but learning as a way of organizing ourselves, learning as a strategic capability, learning as a foundation of resilience. The future won't belong to the regions with the most knowledge. Knowledge has never been more abundant, nor will it necessarily belong to those with the biggest budgets or the largest institutions. I believe the future will belong to the places that become best at learning together. Manchester reminds us that this isn't wishful thinking, it's already happening. In the end, Manchester isn't really the story, it's the evidence. The real story is how any place can become better at learning together. The challenge now is helping make it happen everywhere. Thanks for spending these few minutes with me. I hope the Manchester story has encouraged you to look beyond the success of one city and to think instead about the capabilities every organisation, every region, and every society will need in the years ahead. If these ideas resonate with you, or if you already are exploring similar approaches, I'd be delighted to continue the conversation. You can learn more about the work of the Enlightened Enterprise Academy by visiting www.enlightenedenterprise.ac, or you can contact me directly